Why does war between great powers happen? Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin, and today I want to discuss the nature of war and specifically why it occurs. As the conflict between the United States and China moves firmly into its new phase, and hegemonic conflict between the two, global war becomes a real risk. A lot of people find that extraordinarily hard to imagine, to the point of thinking that people who are warning about this are some kind of deluded doomsayer. They don't understand why such a war could occur, because they would reason, well, such a conflict would be so utterly devastating to both sides, to the global economy, to the development and prosperity of their own people, that it would be impossible for them to contemplate it. And there's another reason, which is that major wars between great powers haven't happened for quite a while. It's been a long time since the Second World War. And a lot of people think that we've moved into a new phase of relationships between countries where trade and investment, free movement of capital, the win-win relationship that happens through trade has essentially made war obsolete. And I wanted to explain precisely why these things are wrong, understandable beliefs, but are based on false premises. So with the second point first, war between great states doesn't happen very often anyway, actually. The First and Second World Wars can almost be seen as one great long war with an interlude between them. But before that, you have to go back to Napoleon before you see a war on that scale. I mean, there were some major conflicts during the 19th century for certain. Germany's invasion of France in 1871, the Crimean War in the mid-19th century. But, the truly, cataclysmic, earth-shaking conflicts that changed the world forever. Well, Napoleon was a full more than 100 years before the Great War. And then you go back to the mid-1600s for the 30 Years' War in Europe, the Treaty of Westphalia. So these massive conflagrations do require the right settings, the right environment for it to occur at all, because it has been a long time since war has been perceived as something that would bring value to the belligerents. Once upon a time, well before the Industrial Revolution, probably long before the advent of the true nation state, it was thought that war may, under the right conditions, bring wealth and prosperity to the leadership. So if everyone's producing roughly the same amount, then having the most arable land with the highest population would confer a commensurate level of power. Certainly the Roman Empire in its great expansion expanded under the belief that such conflicts will bring prosperity and glory to Rome. And it wasn't until the reign of the Emperor Hadrian when he realized that actually there was an outer limit of reasonable administration for which the empire should no longer be expanded, that he realized that actually these things do have diminishing returns and create its own series of risks. So forever, war has had its own drawbacks. Thus, why do wars happen? Well, the ancient historian Thucydides, who gave us the great history of the Peloponnesian War. The history of the Peloponnesian Wars is my number one book of all time. I thoroughly recommend it. It is an extraordinary piece of historical literature. And Thucydides put it pretty succinctly. He said wars happen for fear, interest, and pride. And pride is the main factor in all of this, okay? No party ahead of World War I really wanted to go to war. And in fact, the economic and trade integration that Europe experienced back then was arguably greater than what it is today. The problem was that every single actor couldn't back down without a significant loss of face and a perceived permanent curtailing of their nation's status. If you have committed to protecting an ally and that ally is attacked and then you don't do anything about it, even if it is absolutely not what you want to do in that moment, then you bring shame to your country, you embarrass your own leadership, you make it much less likely that other countries will seek to ally with you in the future because they don't see you as a trustworthy partner, and you have backed down towards in the face of aggression of a historical competitor and potential enemy. That is a very hard thing psychologically for a leader to do, and politically it may be nigh on impossible. And if we take China today as an example, in the early 19th century, the British had a massive trade imbalance with China, and that's because the British loved tea and they didn't have anything that the Chinese wanted to buy. The one thing that they did find was opium, which was a dangerous narcotic that, unsurprisingly, the Chinese government sought to curtail. And the British, not wanting to let that lie, decided to wage a war over it. And they sent 11 steamships up the Yangtze River and brought all of China to its knees, something that was absolutely unfathomable to the Chinese government until it actually happened. They had no idea the magnitude of the technological disparity that existed between themselves and the industrialized Western powers. And then the rest of Europe and the United States started to carve them up through various trade unequal treaties, right? That opened up their ports. They lost Hong Kong, Hainan. They lost what is now Vladivostok to the Russians. And their economy just utterly collapsed. And eventually that led to the collapse of the imperial family. This was a time where China was extremely weak. And now that they have massively industrialized, all but eliminated poverty in their country, the second largest economy on earth, will soon be the largest economy on earth, they have firmly rooted in the depth of their soul, never again will we allow foreign interests to dominate China. And in order to avoid that, we need to be the great middle kingdom once more. We need to be setting the rules of the road. It's not enough just to prevent other countries from interfering in our internal affairs. We need to be able to dictate the rules to the rest of the world, because our rightful place as the middle kingdom is the viceroy between heaven and earth, and thus the cultural centerpiece of human civilization. Anything less than that, and China is not realizing in its mind the true potential of that state. And then there are examples where the interests of the United States and China are fundamentally incompatible. And Taiwan is the big ulcer in all of this. From the Chinese point of view, Taiwan is a rebellious province, and that the only reason that Taiwan hasn't already been reincorporated into the mainland is because the Americans put the 7th Fleet in the Taiwan Strait once the communists had taken over all of the mainland, while Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists escaped to Taiwan and were protected by American force of arms. It's very unlikely, extremely unlikely, that the United States will ever be able to put the 7th Fleet in the Taiwan Strait today. The last time that happened was in 1996, 25 years ago. Chinese military capabilities have immeasurably improved since then, with the main contingency being preventing American interests in interference in any conflict over Taiwan. This means that China's number one strategic objective is to break a treaty between Taiwan and the United States. China wants Taiwan to be reincorporated into the mainland, with or without it being a peaceful transition. And the United States is committed to Taiwan's defense, as is Japan. And so any forcible attempt to bring Taiwan back to China is a fundamental status question for the United States. Does it break its treaty with Taiwan? What message does that send to all of the other allies in Asia, South Korea, Japan, Australia? The fact that the United States has, for many decades, been the uncontested master of the Pacific Ocean, if they are pushed out by force by China, what does that say about American prestige and power? The global commons are underwritten by the United States, whether it's space, cyberspace, or indeed the oceans. If America backs down in the face of this, then they're going to be widely perceived as not being able to make sacrifices for its values and protect the global order, and in fact, recognizing that China may well be supreme. Is that at all compatible with the American psyche? And what American leader is going to be able to stand up before the American people and say they're surrendering to China without a fight? That's just inconceivable. So although it's not in the interest of anyone from a human development, human well-being point of view to have a conflict, the psychological harm in backing down, particularly in the face of a ruthless totalitarian dictatorship, which is what China is, it's a Han ethno-state that's committing genocide against the Uyghurs and betraying already a long-term treaty with Britain over Hong Kong to forcibly reincorporate that population into Beijing supremacy. It's inconceivable that a Western liberal democratic super hyper power that has been the most powerful nation since at least the 1890s could just roll over. That would be almost inconceivable to imagine. So although it's in no one's interest, it would be in everyone's interest to compromise and to sort this out, because their interests are not compatible, that the minimum required for a negotiated solution on one side is more than the maximum concession that the other could possibly entertain, that means that conflict is inevitable. And Taiwan is just one flashpoint. There's the Korean Peninsula, there's the South China Sea, there's the East China Sea, there's China's engagement with Iran, there is China's engagement with Russia, there's Russia's contentions in the Ukraine and Eastern Europe, and the alliances begunning between Russia and China in that space. Like, all of this is heading for the next conflagration. The one thing that people say, and I don't agree with it, and I'll explain why. The one thing that people say is, oh, yes, but this was all pre-nuclear age. If you look at the Second World War, they go, well, yes, war was always going to be terrible, but it would be more difficult to avoid miscalculation, right? Like in the pre-nuclear age, you go, yes, we will wage a war. Yes, there'll be a lot of human devastation, but it's not going to end the human race. Okay, we're not living under the shadow of annihilation in the way that the nuclear age does create for us, and thus war between great powers does become unthinkable, because even the whole notion of sacrificing one's status does ultimately pale and compared with the annihilation of your entire nation. That has a nice kind of Nepenthe feel about it, but that's actually not how nuclear dynamics work in practice. For example, in the United States and China, they will both think that the other will back down. If you go, well, yes, they wouldn't dream of going to war with us, because that war could end in nuclear exchange. And no country that's sane, which we believe the Chinese are and the Chinese believe the Americans are, would ever contemplate such a thing. So both sides will think that the other backs down, and that even if conflict does erupt between them, there'll be an assumption that it won't escalate to the nuclear level, because neither side will put each other in a situation, they believe, which would create that unthinkable option. And the other issue in particular with China and the United States is that this theater is not in some continental landmass where some miscalculation could cause a conflict, that escalates super rapidly, both sides will think, look, this is going to happen at sea mostly. And if a nuclear weapon happens to be used in the middle of the ocean, or a tactical, nuclear mine destroys submarines, is that really escalating to the nuclear level? What if a nuclear weapon goes off in Macau, or the Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, like these military bases? Is that really a nuclear escalation? Will that not deter the United States at that point without going to an extreme nuclear exchange? These ideas make nuclear use entirely plausible. And the belief that the other side will back down before a full-scale strategic exchange occurs is one of the great foibles of this. The only thing that gives the argument of nuclear deterrence that to the scale that conventional war is fully deterred credence is the fact that we haven't had a major conventional war between great powers since the end of the Second World War. But that is correlation, not causation. As I said at the start of the video, hegemonic war between great powers only happens occasionally anyway, typically when there are major global power shifts where interests are incompatible with one another, and that the only resolution is either conflict or a dramatic curtailing of a nation's status. And that is why wars occur. Wars occur because even if the decision makers are rational, the would-be belligerents want to avoid conflict where possible, circumstances overtake them in such a way that any alternative would be not only a loss of face, but a permanent diminishing of their nation-state status, prominence, and power. And for most leaders, even war is a lesser of those two evils. That's my view. Please leave your comments down below. If you have any questions on this, let me know. The point of the video is to really drive home the point that the war between the US and China is highly probable, not just likely, probable, over the next few decades. And this is the reason why. And so the arguments say, well, it would be terrible and it would be irrational, it would be destructive, and there would be all this harm. Of course, all of that is true. But that's not why war happens. If you found value in this, please leave a like, subscribe. We talk about these issues all of the time, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.